I would say use technology as minimally as possible. You don't have to go back to using an overhead projector, but ask the kids to create a poster, ask them to create a model, ask them to go outside and have an experience, or bring in materials that they can have an experience in the class. Bring out the math manipulatives. Help them understand conceptually what they're learning in math, because then the higher level math that they get later on will make so much more sense.
Hello and welcome to another episode. I am your host, Yogi Patel, and today we have a very special guest, Eva Dwight. She's a positive discipline trainer specializing in supporting parents and educators raise teenagers and work with teenagers. And Eva, welcome to the show. Tell us about yourself.
Okay. Well, I started my career as a junior high English and language arts teacher. And when I was going through my teacher training, I had almost no training at all in managing challenging behaviors from kids. And so I walked into seventh grade classroom when I was a new teacher and had no idea what to do when kids were misbehaving. And so I like to make the observation that when I started teaching, I thought I was all about teaching English and reading English language arts skills. That's what I was there for. And because I was there to teach English and reading, the part that I was missing was the children that I was supposed to be teaching English and language arts skills to. And my classroom management skills were really hot and cold. Like one day I would be permissive because I thought that we were going to really just have a good time learning together. And I'm young and cute. I thought I'm 22, 23 years old, and they're 12 and 13. And we're just going to have fun learning together, right? Except when you're 12, anybody older than about 17 is old. And they didn't have a relationship with me. They didn't have a reason to do what I wanted them to do. And so they would act up. And so I would go from being permissive one day to just being irritated and annoyed. And the mentor teacher I had down the hallway said, when they're misbehaving, just turn off the lights and make them write their spelling words 20 times each. That'll put them back in gear. So I tried that. And what happened because I turned off the lights and made them write their spelling words 20 times each, and I was mad. And I remember walking around the aisle saying, I hope you're as mad at me as I am at you right now. This is just unacceptable. And, and giving detention, all this. So that's, then I'd go home and feel lousy because that's not who I am. That's not who I wanted to be. And so then I'd come back the next day and be super nice. And then when I got tired of being walked all over, I would go back to being authoritarian. So I went permissive, authoritarian, back and forth, which, as I look back, must have just been horribly confusing to my students. Like, which Mrs. Dwight is going to be in our classroom when we walk in the door today? And so it took me some time. I'm embarrassed to admit how many years it took me to finally get it, that when I took time to really connect with my students and get to know them as human beings, it's not that I wasn't teaching English and reading skills. I was. But you know what? When I decided that I'm teaching kids English and language arts skills, my focus became on who these children were as individuals and what needs they had and how I could meet those needs. And it wasn't magical. It was rather a time-consuming learning process for me. But almost magically, their behavior fell into place because I was treating them with dignity and respect. I was asking them for help with problems that I was having. I was asking them to help me figure out how we could make this work better. And we were working together as a team in my classroom. And so what happened over time was that I'd been teaching probably 10 years then. My older son was 2, and my mom had taken a class. She was a music teacher and just took a random class for professional development credits. And she brought me the original Positive Discipline book by Jane Nelson and said, this was the best training ever. And I wish I had had this when you were growing up. And now Jeremiah is turning 2. I think this will be really helpful to you. And so I read the Positive Discipline book, and it just really spoke to who I had become over time as a teacher and who I wanted to be as a parent. And so my husband and I started using Positive Discipline more strategically, more intentionally, whereas what I had learned in the classroom was what my mom calls by guess and by golly. I figured it out. But that's who I was being. I was being a positive discipline teacher before I knew that there was something called positive discipline. And so that's when mom brought me that book, it just really rang with me. And I started learning more about it and deepening my understanding. And then I met this wonderful woman who lives around the corner from me. Her name is Dodie Blomberg. She's a positive discipline lead trainer. And she had been using the classroom program in her own fifth grade classroom, and then was starting to use it as a parent. And she said, did you know that you could get certified to teach parenting classes in this stuff? And I was like, wow, really? So I took her certification class and started offering parenting classes at my school. And then the next thing I did was take the positive discipline in the classroom training and used elements of that in my work. By then I had become a school counselor. So I was a teacher for 12 years and a junior high counselor for 20 years here in Mesa, Arizona, for our public school district. And so I used positive discipline in the classroom tools with the kids I was working with to support the teachers in the challenges they were facing. And then in 2018, after 32 years in the school system, I decided it was time for me to step away from that. And I wanted to do positive discipline in a bigger way. So I went through the process of becoming a trainer. And these last 5.5 years, I have just really deepened my awareness and practice in positive discipline as a parent, as a human being, as a teacher, educator. And so the work that I do with parents and teachers is just so meaningful to me because I see it as transformational. It really has transformed who I am as a person, a teacher, a parent, and I have seen it transform people's classrooms, people's families, and the power of this work is just bigger than I can even describe. And so I'm so pleased to be here with you today talking about that.
Eva, you are absolutely inspiring. And, my journey started with parent class accidentally that helped me, which I took for my children. And then later, after opening 2 Montessori schools, I was in a pickle on how do I support parents and my own staff members, and ended up on the same road as you, but in a different way. And how empowering that none of us, when we get started in our school journey as teachers, often have the tools.
Right.
And we are still doing the best that we can. We chose that profession because we love children. We want to support them. And having these tools, and that's why we're having these conversations, that's my passion, is to support others who really just need additional ways to get there. And we know that each teacher is going to make a difference, and they're going to get there, and there are tools out there. So today we're going to talk a lot about teens and how could teachers help them in schools, and how would they manage some of the expectations from parents. So thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Many of us, Eva, you and I both have experiences setting boundaries. So you're a teacher in the classroom. So how can we strike the balance between giving our students independence and setting necessary boundaries for their well-being and safety, and for us to be able to teach everyone the curriculum that we do have?
There's an activity that I really like in the positive discipline in the classroom curriculum to help teachers create expectations together with kids. And my experience has always been that when kids walk in the door, the rules or guidelines are on the wall already. Here's what you're expected to do when you walk in the door. And what we know from a lot of research is that human beings have more buy-in when they have a contribution to the process. And so rather than having kids walk in the door and say, this is what you got to do, I think it's really helpful to say, okay, here are some things that we need to be able to accomplish as a class. I'm expected to teach you, and you need to learn these things so that you have skills that you can use at the next level. How could we make this work together? And maybe the teacher has some possible guidelines written down and saying, here are some things I was thinking of. I wonder if there's anything else that you would add to that, and just kind of get the kids' input, because they might be thinking things that you're like, oh, that's a really good idea. Let's put that on the list. And then let's talk specifics. So when we put on the board, students will treat each other with respect. What does that mean? And so this activity, it's called the best. I can't remember exactly. It's about creating the best school year ever, best classroom experience ever. But what we do is we say, okay, what does that look like? What does that sound like? So if we're going to treat each other with respect, what does that look like? What does that sound like? And maybe we assign a small group to brainstorm around that and write down some ideas. And maybe another expectation is that we show good listening skills. What are good listening skills? Whether the teacher is talking or another student is presenting, what do we agree to do? What does that look like? What does it sound like? And so as we talk about those specifics, looks like, sounds like, for these different guidelines, it may take a few class periods to really iron all that out. But once it's done, when the kids have contributed to that process, they have a whole lot more buy-in, and we can even have them sign the poster that's up on the wall that kind of spells out what they've agreed to, so that we can say, okay, this is our agreement. And what that does is it gives us an opportunity as teachers to say, when a child isn't following the agreement, we can point to the agreement and say, I notice that you're talking when I'm talking, and from my perspective, that goes against what you said you would do here. What could you do so that you're following the agreement? Or do we need to talk about this as an individual or as a class to say, okay, what's going on that you're talking when I'm talking? A lot of these conversations can be held independently with the child. If it's a big class issue, then we want to have a class meeting. But if it's an individual issue, then find time to talk to the student and say, what is going on that I notice so much that you're talking when I'm talking? If we assume you're being rude, you don't care about what I'm trying to say, you don't think I'm important, you don't respect me, if I assume all those negative things, I build an automatic wall that keeps me from really understanding what might be really going on for the child. It may be that they don't respect me and that they don't care about my subject. I don't know unless I ask. So having an opportunity to ask, what's going on for you here? I need to know more. And just really listen. And then we can problem solve around that. So I get it. You want to talk to your friends. It's the only class you have with that friend, and you value your time with them. And it's important that I be able to teach you and the other students. What opportunities can we create so that you can be with your friend in a positive way and still respect the needs of the class and the needs of the learning? So when we create individual agreements with kids, again, we bring in their contribution and create more buy-in with them. And we take that opportunity to build relationship by saying, I understand what you need. I understand what's going on for you. I need you to understand what's going on for me and the needs of the group. So I think when we're talking about teenagers, usually we're in junior and senior high, that can be kind of complicated to carve out some time to have an individual conversation with a kid, because usually teachers get them for 50 to 60 minutes at a time, and then they bring the next group in. So when am I supposed to talk to a kid? Sometimes there are times within the class period when we can have a whispered conversation, but often when I was in the classroom or even as a counselor, I would need to have a conversation with a kid. I would need to have that be before or after school or during lunch or whatever time it is that we agree on, so that we can have this conversation and spell it out. And then I used to, write out the agreement. You agree to do this. I agree to do that. I'll go make you a copy. Here's your copy. Here's my copy. And then if the behavior starts to show up again, almost all the time, all I needed to do was go get my copy of the agreement, put it in front of the child, and just quietly whisper, this is what we agreed to. Is there anything that would keep you from following that right now? Or do we need to talk about how to change the agreement? And almost every single time, they'd pull it back together again and follow the agreement. So I think kids have different priorities than we do. My priority is to make sure that kids learn the curriculum I'm supposed to teach And it also needs to be that I'm connecting with those children so that they want to learn from me. So those individual conversations need to be about connection, empathy, understanding, and creating a relationship so that when they're in the larger classroom environment with all the other kids, that relationship can be foundational to really inviting their cooperation and collaboration with you. So I think we need to be creative at the secondary level, because a lot of times in elementary school, because you have most times the kids all day long, there might be more times to carve out those individual conversations. So when we get creative about it, we can make it happen. And I think it can be really effective. So I don't know if that completely answers your question.
Yes,
went
it
around the block
does.
there.
And I had a actually addition, because you had me thinking. Sometimes after school, we say, well, we want to speak to you today after school.
Right.
And they have other activities. They want to get out there and do something, or they have to let their parent know, and they feel like they're in trouble.
Right.
So having that sort of buffer to say, you know what, let's talk about it. We just want to connect. I really just want to meet with you. And when we come with that intention of, I just want to connect and we'll have a discussion because I know we're going to work this out. And say, we're going to need 10 minutes tomorrow. Is that okay with you? And that just invites that student to not go home and have to really angst over it, or have the parents then have a call to the teacher saying, hey, you know what?
Right.
My child was in trouble. No, we just wanted to have a conversation. So creating that peace with the parents too. Because sometimes from the beginning of the year, when they come to those orientation nights, saying, well, time to time, I'm going to ask your child to meet with me 10 minutes after school. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there's something terrible.
Right.
But I like to connect with my students, and having that open conversation and creating the expectations or setting the guidelines with parents as well. What are some of the other things that you think would be helpful, because they're in middle school and things are just so fast and not having ample time for us to connect? How could we have a relationship with parents when things get challenged?
Yeah, and I think, and I appreciate you bringing this up, because, until really the last couple of years of high school, kids aren't driving, and it doesn't mean that every high school kid has their own car. Yeah. A lot of them are still relying on the bus to get to school, or their own selves to walk or ride a bike or whatever. But I think taking just 5 minutes for a phone call to the parent to say, I really need to have this conversation with your child. When is a good time? Because if you're going to need to bring them in before school and their work schedule is whatever it is, a lot of times parents would say, I have to be at work at 6 a.m. I can't get them there at 7:30 before school, or I work until 6. I can't pick them up late, and the bus is the only way they have home. So I think we can, again, get creative about lunchtime. And I also think I don't want to diminish elective teachers in any way. Those electives and PE teachers are a lot of times for the kid the most important hour of their day. And those are also the classes where there might be a little bit more flexibility so that we could ask. And, especially for me as a counselor, then I had a broad open schedule. But as a teacher, I only have 1 hour of prep time a day. Within this hour, where is that kid that I could be able to pull them in from another class? So it may not be an elective class or a PE class or whatever, but if I can connect with the teacher whose class they might be missing for 15 minutes, 20 max. And this shouldn't happen very often, because a lot of times it doesn't need to happen very often. We took that opportunity to have the conversation. Almost never I had to have a second conversation with a kid about that, because they felt respected and we solved the problem. So moving forward, I didn't need that very often. So I think when we can do that for each other as teachers in the school, to say, we know that this is our student population and that there's not a lot of flexibility with after school or before school. Sometimes during school, we're going to need to flex with each other. And if you do it for me, I can do it for you. And so maybe that's a conversation as a faculty that we have, because what I love about positive discipline is it's not just adult to kid skills, it's human to human skills. And I want to be this way with kids too. I don't want to be here with kids. I want to be human to human with kids. And when we implement these same strategies with each other as adults, so that when we look at specific class meeting skills that we teach kids when we're teaching the positive discipline curriculum to kids, it involves a meeting with the class to talk about things we're having trouble with and how we can brainstorm for solutions together and give each other compliments and appreciations so that we notice the good things that are happening. You know what? When we do that as adults or as inter-department members, your English department, your math department, whatever, within your school, we as adults are probably operating more effectively, and we can come up with solutions that are helpful to all of us as we all work with the same kids, trying to get good results with them. So I think there's so many applications to this work at the micro level with just within your classroom, or even with just the student is even more micro level to within the whole school system, and then including parents. So, yeah.
So having those whole school training for teachers definitely is supportive, where you can make agreements or connections, or as a whole school come up with a plan and timing where some of these meetings can happen, or time to connect, because we talk about social emotional learning in our schools, and then the time takes away from those connection times. I think more we look at education as not just, one has to be in place, which is connection and social emotional bond between the guide, the teacher, and the student, for the academic, the learning to happen, right? I think it's Jane Nelson or Adler talks about you have to reach the heart before you reach the head. So vice versa. Or Montessori talks about the hand is the instrument of the mind. But that hand and that connection, the person who's giving them the nurture and information, there has to be that piece of respect and relationship building. So I think this is a longer conversation in our school systems, creating schedules that really allow for that free play that we're speaking about. So we're not pulling children in during their lunchtime or PE.
Right.
And at the same time, just having this opportunity to connect with the whole family system. We talk about the village, but then we don't have the infrastructure
to create a village.
Yeah, exactly.
Village work effectively. And what you just said made me think too. I didn't want to lose this thought. When I was first talking about me in the classroom as a new teacher, thinking I was there to teach English language arts, when really what I needed to be was there to teach kids. And so when we focus on the needs of the children and even teens, when I call them children, I don't mean that they're little kids. I just mean that they are the younger set, right? When we talk about meeting the needs of our students as unique human beings, we're talking about how to meet with them here as human to human. And so I think you just said, when we meet these human needs, then the academic needs will be met. But when things are out of alignment in ourselves and with our relationship with kids, the academic piece falls apart, because without the relationship, we won't be able to teach them anything. They won't learn from us. And so I think social and emotional learning and academics are often separate, when really what positive discipline does is it embeds what we call social and emotional skills into the regular classroom environment so that they're cohesive and integrated.
Yes. And also just looking for what's going well. I appreciated what you said about that in terms of they're students. They're going to get there. What is our perception of it, and how do we support them in getting their goals met or needs met, and creating those agreements and guidelines together? So it's togetherness. It's not I'm the teacher and you're the student, and that collaborative effort that you spoke about also goes into the teachers, teachers helping teachers. Often when we are in schools, especially supporting teens or any other age group, we get into challenges when we are all trained or similarly speaking the language or have this opportunity to problem solve together. The staff meeting is also very, very important. And often that time to create staff meetings where we could have discussions about how, as a whole school, we're going to be looking at behaviors. Are we sending them to the principal's office? Because when you discourage children and when we constantly tell them that I can't deal with you, and sometimes I'm not putting teachers down who invite the students to go elsewhere because they just don't know what to do with it. But having those skills, we've all been there. I've been there. where I didn't know what to do and I just needed someone else's support. But more conversations and guidelines we have in schools and supporting one another, coming up with ways that are encouraging, I think it goes a long way. So there's a lower burnout. The burden is not on one person, but when we're working together, because teachers are so qualified and so amazing, and we don't want to lose them to stress. We just want them to continue. And that collaborative piece, the social emotional learning and academics coming together, and all the teachers coming together, including parents and the administration, to create those environments that creates that village where students are the winners.
Right. And when we teach kids collaboration skills, those are the skills that they need to be successful out there in the workplace. And so when we're always in that top-down place with them, do as I say because I say so, then we're not teaching kids skills that they need to be collaborative in the workplace. And then you have the workplace professionals saying, what's the matter with these people? They don't know how to work on a team. They don't know how to do this or that. We have to really take that to heart and say, okay, what's expected in the workplace and in the adult environment, that we can bring those skills down to the classroom and say, how can we make that work here so that we're growing kids with these skills? Because without these skills, the academic skills they have will fall flat if they don't have the people skills that need to go along with them. So again, we can't separate the two. They have to be integrated together in our classroom experience. And positive discipline teaches us how to do that.
I would like to, from what you just shared about having those skills, and if you're a leader, what are some of the skills that you want to teach? So managing time, right? Time management and curfews or guidelines, whatever that might be, or assignment completion in our classrooms. So what are some of the effective strategies teachers can use to monitor and limit the screen time? So when we have tablets in school, that they're not misused and children, or I keep saying children myself, but students are able to stay focused. How can teachers create skills that are lifelong in this area?
I think on the one hand, it's really wonderful that so many schools now have tablets and computers and things that are readily accessible to their students. And at the same time, we know now from research, because it's been about the last, 15 years or so where that's starting to happen, and now it's happening full force. We've had the time to do some research on how that's affecting kids' social skills, their thinking skills, their critical thinking skills. I would ask teachers to use the technology minimally. And I know people are like, what? It's so amazing. We can just push a button and there's the information. And yet kids need to be able to be tactile in their learning, because the learning stays with them longer when they've done something rather than when they've just copied and pasted or written something on a PowerPoint or whatever. When they've created a physical project, when they've made a real poster, all the things that they're doing tactily, and you as a Montessori teacher probably are just like, oh, of course, we always knew this. Those of us who didn't have the benefit of Montessori structure growing up, as a teacher, I had to become more aware of this. The more you do physically, the better you remember what it is that you're trying to learn. And so I would say use technology as minimally as possible. You don't have to go back to using an overhead projector, but ask the kids to create a poster, ask them to create a model, ask them to go outside and have an experience, or bring in materials that they can have an experience in the class. Bring out the math manipulatives. Help them understand conceptually what they're learning in math, because then the higher level math that they get later on will make so much more sense. And their learning will be more concrete for them. And so I think we as adults have a responsibility, because the kids don't have the executive functioning system to maintain the structures that they need so that they don't get too much exposure to technology and screen time. So we as teachers need to work with parents to say, here are the ways we're going to use technology at school. Yes, it's really helpful that you can turn in an assignment online And we're still going to do hands-on projects. And maybe I use the computer to have you write an assessment of your learning and turn that into me so that you're practicing your writing skills, and creating a written experience that way involves a critical thinking process as well. So how can we mix things up so that we're combining technology with what you might call old-fashioned learning styles, so that the kids' learning is more holistic, so that they're learning different kinds of skills and different ways of thinking and doing. I think that's really important. And then letting parents know, here's what we're going to try to do to limit screen time and help kids use it productively. And here's what you can do at home, because parents may not be aware of the research. I think it's imperative that we be aware of the research and tell parents, here's what we know. Here are some things you can do to help your child understand that there are boundaries to be set around this technology use. And here's how we can do it. And that means at home, you need to have activities that your child can do, or send them outside to play, have games or, craft activities and cooking activities, or whatever it is that you can do, so that not everything they do at home is locked into a screen of some sort. So I think that addresses the screen issue. I don't know if I've addressed that sufficiently.
And the time management piece. The time management is very, very, because now, of course, sometimes the screen time or other activities adds to not staying on task, getting the homeworks done, or studying for the test.
We can help kids with time management by, I think, having conversations with them about the time that they have at home. So one of my awarenesses as an education professional and a parent at the same time is that what we do to kids, we would never do to ourselves. We ask them to come and spend 6 to 8 hours a day working and learning and using their brain. And then especially by high school, and if they're in advanced classes, this can get really out of control. We ask them to come home and do another 5 to 6 hours of work. And as a parent, watching that happen to my children, who also had outside activities that were important to their development and their enjoyment of life, when my child is up until midnight regularly, keeping up with the homework, that's out of balance. And so I think it's really important that we structure our teaching to be, I think, more tactile, so that kids learn the concepts more readily. You don't have to do 100 problems. If you can do 5, I know you get the concept, and I don't need you to go home and do 50 more. If you can read a part of this book, and we're going to spend a lot of time reading here, then I need to talk to my students about how much time they have for reading at home. And kid A might have the skills to whip through that book in a couple hours, and kid B might really struggle with reading, and they struggle to get through a couple of chapters. So what's the goal of the learning? If I want them to read this novel, this book, whatever, this chapter of the textbook, what's the goal? What are some different ways they can learn and demonstrate their learning? And how much time is it really going to take? So I need to listen to kids and say, how much time does it take you to do this, student A? Student B, how much time does it take you? And get some perspective from a large group of kids about what I'm asking from them outside of my class. And then I think the kids who are struggling with that, things are not getting turned in. I don't know why that is. Again, I don't want to assume that you're trying to be bad or disrespectful or anything else. I want to know what's keeping you from getting your work done. So again, an opportunity for a private conversation. What is this child expected to do at home? What's their life like? And what time do they have? So how can this student and I be creative about how they can demonstrate their learning? Because that's an important piece of the puzzle, but the piece doesn't only have to look a certain way, right? We can shape the puzzle pieces differently depending on the needs of the children. So again, I think this comes back to individual conversations with the class as a whole, and really understanding who these young people are that we're working with, so that they are the first priority, not the subject matter I'm trying to teach. Because when they feel that they're a priority, they'll be more willing to try to get this other curricular stuff done, or at least demonstrate some piece of it to the extent that they can. Does that make sense?
And finding a way, what you said about, taking a survey of different groups to see how long it takes to get the homework done, because perhaps some students need things broken down further. So looking at what we need to cover, how we're going to cover it, being creative, breaking tasks down, and also pairs. I don't even know if that's even an option in certain classrooms.
Right.
Pairing them with one another, inviting group sharing, because chances are there'll be conversations, there'll be discussions. If someone is behind or ahead, they're going to be able to support one another. And I appreciate the management skills, time management skills that you spoke about. First, it starts with us on making sure the expectations are age appropriate, developmentally appropriate. We're covering the topics at school and not expecting students in class quickly sharing something. Children are learning through all of their senses, and just auditorily, just telling them this needs to be done, this needs to be done. Students sometimes miss 5 or 6 things in that big conversation that's so rapid because we're out of time. They might go home and they're confused, and they more further confuse themselves when they get home because now they're upset that they don't remember what was supposed to have been done.
Yeah.
So just looking at that brain development, the self-regulation piece. And I think as teachers, we have the right outcome in mind, and perhaps we, with parents and our administration, come up with strategies so that we could spend our time, create clarity, give that information. And I know this is a lot for teachers. I know there is a lot because there is a lot of paperwork afterwards. Yeah. So not to be discouraged, but maybe finding creative ways to teach most information at school so they have downtime at home. They're not doing 6-7 hours of homework at school, and then they're missing out on this social development and family time. Because sometimes what we talked about in the earlier episode about things that students can do at home, they have expectations at home.
Right.
Expectations from school. And you said it's been unfair in where our children are, our students are at this time. Mm-hmm. They are very busy. Where is this time to be that? You talked about boredom earlier. How can students just be?
Yeah.
And when they escape on social media, to find a way to sort of relax. And then, so, just creating some moments at home, creating some moments at school.
Yeah.
Children to just understand all that information that's thrown at them.
Yeah, we want learning to be meaningful for them. And instead, school becomes a chore that they hate to do. And so we stifled their energy and their excitement around learning by piling on the work and creating such high stress levels around what should be really an amazing thing that they get to learn, because teachers are teaching their content because they're excited about it. We want kids to be excited about it. And even if they're not doing cartwheels with excitement, we'd like them to at least feel like this is a pleasant place to be and I'm learning interesting stuff. And how do we help keep that as the focus rather than you have to get all this done by this date? Because if you don't learn this by this date, the world's going to fall apart. It's really not. And you're going to have other opportunities to learn going forward. So I think we as adults have a responsibility to look at our time and how we're managing it, and then help kids learn how to manage that as well. And if we see a kid who's just really, has no time management skills, then taking it back to baby steps and just conversations around little things they can do to be effective in a small way, teaching skills that they need to be successful in life, not just at school.
Academic stress and a lot of pressures. Those are two things that teachers worry about for their students, because parents have other responsibilities and other tasks at home. Maybe there may be sports, maybe they have religion classes or a variety of things that happen. So what specific strategies can teachers employ with their teenage students in managing academic stressors. And also, in addition to that, there's sometimes social pressures, right, related to appearance, clothing, who's friends with whom. And sometimes students deal with that through mood swings, and we can see certain behaviors in the classroom. So how could teachers manage all of these things that they're noticing?
So I'm going to come at that a little bit sideways because I'm going to share a little bit of my experience as a parent who's also an educator. And at the time that my children were teenagers, I was a school counselor. And even at the junior high, a big part of our focus is getting them ready for high school and looking on beyond that to college and career and their future life choices. And so at very early ages, as I look back on this, I stepped into what I consider a trap. And if I had a big life do-over, it would be that I would not step into this trap, is that we start to put really heavy expectations on children at a very young age. And we act like there's one path to success in life. And if you screw up anywhere along that path, boy, your chances are gone, baby. You ruined it. And how that impacted me as a parent, because this was, how I'm working with kids at school is, well, you need to be able to do this and that and the other thing so that you're successful and you get to go to college and blah, blah, blah. And then I'd come home, and at the state of Arizona, when my older son was going through high school, was offering full ride scholarships to the state universities for kids who had a certain GPA, scored a certain level on the state testing. And I think there was one other criteria, but one of those GPA criteria was you couldn't have a C in any academic required subject. And so my older son had achieved that. And then my younger son was a sophomore taking geometry, which, as is true with many kids, it was kicking his butt, to use, a turn of phrase there. He had always done well in school. He had always been like right there with everything. And a lot of kids that I noticed, they sailed through algebra and then they hit geometry and they're like, they don't know what hit them. It's a different way of thinking. It's a different kind of math. And he was really struggling. And so we were getting him in for extra help with the teacher, and he was retaking tests, but still not doing well. And my message, as I'm sorry to say, many times was, Nathan, you can't get a C because you'll lose that scholarship. And he was already under stress because he didn't feel good about himself because he didn't understand why this is so hard. He'd never experienced anything this hard before. So he always felt so lousy about himself and thinks suddenly I'm not capable. And then his mom is piling on the pressure saying, hey, get a C. And about that time, I read Carol Dweck's book called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. And she talked about fixed versus growth mindset. And what that did for me was recognize that I was looking at his whole future, and actually the future of all my students, from a really fixed mindset, that there's only one way to do this well. And if you mess up anywhere along the way, you've blown the whole process. And so my awareness was, okay, so he fails geometry, or he gets a C or a D. You know what? He could take it over again next year and take the higher grade that he's sure to get the second time around. He could take it in summer school. He could get the C and not get the scholarship. And he could go to community college, which is a lot less expensive than state university, for 2 years and then transfer to the university. He actually has a lot of life paths. He could apply for scholarships. He could get a job. We could, find a way to pay for state university without a scholarship. He could take loans. There are lots of pathways to get from here to here, not just one. And when I recognized that was a really significant year for me as a parent and as an educator, counselor, that what we need to do is help kids see that there's more than one way to define success. And when we see that there are different pathways, then I think we can look at kids who are struggling and say, okay, I appreciate the effort you're putting into this. You're struggling. How can I be helpful to you? And if you got a 26% on the test this time, and you come back and help me, or let me help you teach you some more and practice some more, let's retake the test. And if you get a 60% next time, it's still a D. And parents used to be like, why are you cheering my kid? He got a D. And I said, but he used to have like a 12% in that class, and now it's at a 62. He's made huge progress. We can't get to the 80s and 90s if we don't go through the 50s and 60s. And so I started cheering for kids for every little bit of progress that they made. And I started giving them encouragement. And what we know in positive discipline is that encouragement is the best motivator. And so how can we encourage kids? We can encourage kids by connecting with them, caring about them as unique individual people on their own life path, listening to them, asking what they need, what their desires are, what their goals are for themselves, and how we can contribute to their journey in a positive way. And when we can approach their learning from that place, we can help them, I think, alleviate a lot of that stress that they put on themselves and that we've been heaping on them as adults, and say, okay, I'm on a journey. There are a lot of paths on my journey. Which one am I taking now? It doesn't mean I have to stay on that path. I can change paths anytime I decide to, because hopefully I'm going to live another 70 or 80 years. And I got a lot of opportunity in 70 or 80 years to do what I want to do with my life. And so I think if we as educators and parents can help kids approach challenge that way, when we're in a growth mindset, we see as a challenge as an opportunity to learn. And we see failure as an opportunity to learn. Okay, what did you learn? What do you want to do differently? Anything? No, I learned this isn't important to me. I don't want to do any more of that at all. I want to go this way instead. Wow, that's really important. So I just wish we could think more holistically. So it's going to be like, I had this huge paradigm shift, and helping other people make this paradigm shift can be a real challenge, but I found it to be very freeing as a parent, and I found as an educator, it opened me up to be able to encourage kids who were struggling and connect with them so that, hey, they want to do better because I've shown them, I think you're doing really well. I wonder if you just did this, if things would go better. Would you be willing to try? And so I'd get them to try, and they'd be successful and say, oh, I can do more than I thought I could. Well, then would you be willing to try this? Okay. Oh my gosh, look what I did this time. So kids who have been used to failing almost everything at school, passing everything at school, even if it's with C's and D's, oh my gosh, that's huge. And we would celebrate that. And so I just think we need a big paradigm shift around the whole goal-oriented thing that the cesspool that we've gotten ourselves into, even though it looks glorious from the outside, when we dig deep, it's not so glorious. We need to rethink how we're approaching education and learning and goal setting for kids.
Absolutely. I think that's a success. And as teachers, instead of us feeling helpless and hopeless, you're given so many tools that we already have at our fingertip. There's some books that you mentioned, and just basically doing the best and accepting small change, one small step at a time towards wherever they need to go. And I think children and students are more inclined to try when they feel capable.
Yes.
Encouraging. And for teachers to know that there are tools out there. There's not a way to just get frustrated at this moment and say, I'm not doing a great job, because as teachers,
right,
changing one child's life or supporting one child, you're changing the trajectory. And what a gift that teachers give to the students in lifelong learning. Teachers are dealing with a variety of things. They're looking at children's academic success. They're looking at their social development and peer pressure. At this age, they're trying to fit in. They're kind of separating into different groups and wanting to belong. How could teachers support students in their classroom when they're struggling with the belonging and peer pressure, and maybe they're withdrawing or they're over trying and overcompensating?
I think the most effective tool that we have for this is class meetings. And in positive discipline, class meetings are more than about getting together in a circle and just having some random conversations. There's actually a structured process for facilitating a class meeting. And we start by teaching kids a number of skills like some of the solution-focused conversations and that we've talked about in earlier sessions. But what we do in class meetings is we start with giving compliments and appreciations. And that's actually a skill that we teach kids how to do. And so it might sound like, Yogi, I want to appreciate you for helping me with that math problem the other day because I didn't know how to do it and you did, and it was really helpful. And then Yogi would say, you're welcome. And so we teach kids a structure for how to give a compliment or an appreciation, as we call it. And we teach the students how to respond appropriately to it and respectfully. And so when we have a regular habit, and at the secondary level, I would say if you can have a class meeting even once a week, 20 minutes maybe tops, and they may not need a class, because you change classes 6 times, 7 times a day. So if you had 6 class meetings a day, that would be a little overkill. But most schools, I think, have a homeroom period or an advisory period where it would be a good place to teach the skills that go into the positive discipline in the classroom curriculum. And so the whole school is learning the skills through their homeroom or advisory period. And then individual teachers can, knowing the kids now have learned this skill, put them into play in kind of a more organic way within the classroom as things come up. And so that might look like, in my class, if I was teaching English, we're going to do class meetings on Monday. We're just going to do 10 minutes because I can't take too much away from curriculum time. I get that. But we're just going to take 10 minutes to give compliments and appreciations. And so over the next week, students, I would like you to watch for somebody who does something helpful to you or helpful to someone else or helpful to us as a class, and be ready to say something about that in our class meeting next week. And so we would go around the circle in the class and everybody would have an opportunity to give an appreciation or a compliment to someone. And then over time, we might mix that up in different ways. We might notice that certain kids don't often get a compliment. So there are different ways we can structure that I won't go into right now, but teachers can be creative with that. But what that does, it does an amazing thing. It just transforms the sense of community in the classroom, because when kids hear, oh, I did that, you noticed, oh, that meant something. Hey, I feel like I belong, like I'm important in some way, I have something to contribute. And in positive discipline, we call that belonging and significance. And so the belonging piece is about unconditional acceptance. And we might say in a family, unconditional love and acceptance. At school, I might say just unconditional appreciation and acceptance and caring. And the significance piece of that is the idea that kids have a contribution to make to the group, and their contribution is valued. And so compliments and appreciations are a great way to do that. So even if different teachers pick different days of the week to do 10 minutes of compliments, it can go a long way toward building a sense of community within the classroom and within the whole school as kids start to feel that vibe. And then the next part that we do is we either look at a solution that we created, and is it working? Do we need to tweak the solution? Is everything okay there? And are there any issues that we need to address and create a solution for? And then we might wrap up our meeting. So we could do 10 minutes of compliments and appreciations on one day, and maybe solution building or things like that on another day. So we're just taking little bits of time to help kids develop skills that build community. And so what happens with peer pressure, from my perspective, is that usually there's somebody who's one up and somebody who's one down. And this person's pressuring this person to join me in this, whatever it is. And there's pressure there that this child feels because they want belonging and significance for whatever reason from this person or this group. And so they're willing to bend to the pressure because they so want to belong. And so when we do class meetings, and compliments and appreciations in particular, what we do is we help kids notice their own strengths, values, and contributions so that they can stand stronger in that. Because when I don't feel like I'm valued, it's easier for me to look for possibly artificial ways to get that value from an external source. And that makes me vulnerable to peer pressure. When I recognize that at least a couple of people in the room feel my contribution and value it, I have less reason to seek external means of belonging. And so I also think when we've created a safe space for kids to be able to share at that level, if they are having a problem, they might be willing to bring it to the group and say, so what if a kid is experiencing this kind of scenario? What could that kid do if they don't want to lose face with the group or get in trouble? So we as teachers can bring some scenarios to the group and ask kids to create possible solutions to that situation. And we can ask kids, if they've got a particular situation, we can make it more anonymous by saying, what if a kid, instead of what if Johnny or Eva or Yogi or whatever. We can make it more anonymous by bringing it up to the group. And I think when we get in the habit of looking at a problem, brainstorming for solutions, and then deciding which ideas are related to the problem, respectful to everybody, reasonable and helpful in solving the problem, when we help kids go through that criteria and then work through a solution that way, they start to see that, oh, there are multiple possibilities of solutions for problems. And if I'm having this problem, even if I don't want to talk about it, I might be more inclined myself to brainstorm possibilities for myself so that I don't only see the one that's staring me in the face. So I think indirectly, we can influence negative peer pressure in that way and create positive peer pressure within the group for what we call in positive discipline, Gemeinschaftsgefühl, or community interest, what's good for the group, not just what's good for the individual. And so I just think there are lots of tools that we have through class meetings that we can use to address those areas where kids might be getting stuck and they don't know how to get out of the stuck.
So creating this community where you're looking for things that are going well, right? A contribution that it's based on positive discipline is based on Adlerian psychology, and it's talking about that social interest. How can I contribute? Where can I really offer what I have to give? And also I'm valued. I'm valuable in this classroom. Really helpful tools, this classroom meetings and putting the problem on the agenda, solving it. You talked earlier about the leadership skills. So we hear from your conversation, we have problem-solving skills, communication, empathy, critical thinking, resiliency, because chances are you're going to make mistakes and how to recover from them. So just a ton of great information, lots of empowerment for teachers, Eva. Thank you for being here and your insightful conversation and just suggestions and your personal vulnerability and sharing your own experience. I greatly appreciate. And I know that you offer positive discipline in the classroom. How could folks find you? What is your website?
My website is pretty easy. It's evadwight.com, EVADWIGHT.com. And so I offer several trainings throughout the year to teachers and parents. And so if you go to my website, you can see what's on board coming up. I know I have a training for teachers coming up in January. And if for instance, you don't see this video until after January, then the other things I can do are schedule trainings for individual schools. Like maybe your school isn't ready to go through a whole positive discipline transformation, but little bitty trainings, a couple hours at a time, or a 90-minute training when there's a professional development time scheduled to start introducing some of these concepts and tools that, like Yogi said, they're based on Adlerian psychology. So they're based in research and they are supported by research. They're trauma-informed strategies. And so we take into account all that we've learned in the last couple of decades about kids' response and adults' response to trauma and how we can use positive discipline tools to mitigate that for kids and help them heal and move forward. So there's so much we can do in smaller trainings for faculty members and for parents that we can schedule one. My schedule is really flexible, and so I'm always happy to speak with people about what their needs are and how we can meet those needs in person or online, depending on where you are and what the need is. So thanks for having me. I just really appreciate the opportunity to share what I'm so passionate about. And I know you are too. So I could talk about this all day, and I appreciate the time to talk with you.
Yes, I can see your passion, and thank you for being here. And if folks are interested, they can definitely take a training with you or hire you for a consultation. And have an amazing day. If you like the content of this video, please don't forget to follow. And also, if you want more information, visit the website yogipateltte.com.